Okay, now we're ready to go. Welcome. Glad that you're here for this study. The group is going to grow larger, I imagine, as people find the link. I'll be watching the waiting room to let people in. And then we'll also use the chat box for communication. With this size group, we could probably do a little more interacting than when the group is larger, but we had about 30 people that indicated they were interested. So there could be more that are going to join us soon. So I wanted to welcome, I'm Reverend Dawn Rosignol, Senior Minister at Monte Vista Christian Church. We have a wonderful group here, a wonderful opportunity to be together in study of this wonderful book. I am only facilitating this through Zoom, and we have very capable leaders facilitating this. We have Eleanor, it says Eleanor's iPad in the window. Eleanor and Ted Cooley are leading it, also with Lisa O'Reilly. Eleanor is a educator with UNM Continuing Education Program. Ted is a retired disciples minister and a history buff, especially New Mexico history and geology, and I learned quite a lot from him. And Lisa is a retired APS music teacher and an avid historian as well. So we have quite a wonderful leadership going to guide us through this study. If you haven't listened to the lecture, you can still do that. And then this will be available on the YouTube channel for a review later as well. So it's a blessing to have a lot of people that are interested in this study to be in conversation. And that means that we'll need to all have our Zooms on mute until you want to indicate that you're wanting to share. You can use the chat box. If you know how to use the chat box, then you can put questions in there, comments in there. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat box. If there's anybody that's indicating they want to talk or share anything, then we'll do that.
And when you call on them, they have to unmute themselves, correct?
Correct. You unmute yourself and then mute yourself back. With this smaller group to begin with, it'll be a lot easier to manage. And then we'll continue next Wednesday at 3 also. And I will not be facilitating, but Brother Ryan, who is our associate minister at the church, will be facilitating that one. Any questions, anybody?
The next Wednesday at 3, do you mean Sunday?
Next Wednesday will be when the lecture is available. And then next Sunday is when the next Zoom goes on. Yes.
That was my question too.
Okay, I may have misstated that. Why don't we begin with a prayer real quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to our leaders. Again, welcome. Let's go to God in prayer. Holy God, you are the God of all people. You give all families their names. You call us all your beloveds. And we thank you for this time that we can be and study together about the history of the United States and much of what is missing in our typical textbooks. I thank you for these who are interested in the study and those who are giving of themselves to prepare and to lead this study. Bless our time together. Bless us in all that we seek to do to glorify you. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. All right, I'm turning it over. Whoever's leading us off.
My name is Lisa, and I'm so happy to see you guys here. I would like you to think one moment, and I want to go, since we're so few, I thought we were going to be 30, so I wasn't going to do this. But since we're so few, I want to go to each person and just say, hi, my name is, and if there's 2 of you, let 2 people talk, and tell us like something like why you joined this Bible study, or why you joined this book study, or what was your first experience with racism? So would somebody like to start, please?
Why don't I call on folks that are in my
There you go.
Zoom?
Yeah.
All right, we have Betsy.
Okay, well, I'm Betsy Noel. I've been with Monte Vista how many years? 7 years now. But I can't remember any first experience with racism. I just grew up in Kansas where we had one Hispanic family and one Black family in the town. Otherwise, people were just Catholic or Protestant. So we were just pretty much boring, you know, and the Hispanic family worked on the railroad and the Black family was the garbage collectors. And I just didn't know any better growing up. So I'm finally learning how I was very privileged, even though I grew up very poor on the farm. I didn't realize I was. So that's about.
Very cool. Betsy's mom.
Betty.
My name
Betty.
is Betty.
She has a name. It's Betty.
Sorry,
Betty.
Betty. I just like to say Betsy's mom.
I grew up in Oklahoma, so I was an Okie, considered ignorant by some people. But our racial mixture included American Indians, and we knew they were different, but I don't think we were prejudiced against them. Maybe we were. I just wasn't aware, but I went to a country grade school, all 7 grades. I took it in 7 years instead of 8. But as I went to California as a high schooler, there I encountered more of the racial discrimination, and that was, of course, with the Mexicans. But in nursing school, I had all kinds of different people, and I didn't have any problem. Maybe other people did, but I didn't. But I think it's good to get this out in the open and deal with it.
Thank you. Who's next?
Dave and Lori.
Hi, I'm
We're gonna-
Dave. I'm one of the older guys in this here group. I was born and raised in Corpus Christi, Texas, and I did have some experience with racial things down there because there were a lot of Hispanic people, of course, who lived down there. Early on in my life, I went on a trip through the South, and I was totally stunned by the restrooms and restaurants and whatever who were restricted. White only signs. I didn't really believe, I guess, that they existed until I actually saw them. My high school in Corpus Christi, there were 3. One was primarily Hispanic, one was primarily gringo, and one was specifically Black. We weren't allowed to go there. They weren't allowed to go to our high school. As a matter of fact, our football team couldn't even play them. I guess they were afraid that the color would rub off or something. When I went to the University of Texas, I got up there and I was astounded. I'm a pretty big sports fan. I found that there was a gentleman's agreement among the athletic directors that they would not invite any Black athletes to participate in varsity sports. We had some good athletes then, but the only Heisman Trophy winners from the University of Texas I remember since then have been Black. But anyway, I've been around a few years. I've seen a lot of things, and I'm a very poor history student. And Lori kind of convinced me that I should join in on this.
Yay, we're glad you're here.
Well, good for Lori. Lori?
I'm Lori Wrigler. I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa. Pretty middle class white neighborhood. I'm not sure my high school had anyone of color. I don't remember anyone of color in my high school. However, I grew up a disciple, and at one point in the time that I was still attending church, probably as a tween maybe, or early teenager, one of the associate ministers took a job in Indianapolis, and lo and behold, he sold his house to a Black family, and he had crosses, they had crosses burned in the house, in the front yard. And that was my first really understanding of how violent and nasty people can be, even though I was aware of racism. And as a college student, I thought about going to march in the marches in Mississippi, but I didn't do it. I worked instead, but yeah.
Thank you, Lori.
Katya?
My name is Katya Adams. I was born and raised in Russia, which is an all-white culture. So I guess my first experience with racism was at the time during the Chechen War, when some of the Chechens started moving to the central and north part of Russia, and I'm by Finland. I'm like really close to the Finnish border. They were actually referred in Russia as the blacks. Even though it's just like slightly, you know, how their skin color is not that much darker than what's considered the whites in Russia. So I'm kind of referred to in very negative, derogatory terms. So I just wanted to read this book for a long time. And when I saw it, that was like an impetus, an opportunity. You know, I recently read a different book, which was pretty much like hot off the press. So You Want to Talk About Race by a Black female writer. And ultimately what she said is that if we grew up in a system that is racist, it's systemic racism, we are all in subtle way racist. And she wasn't trying to accuse anyone. I actually really enjoyed her tone, but we don't even realize, like, even if we're like sort of looking at Black people with pity or a sense of guilt, you know, that is also kind of an indication that we're setting them aside. So, and I kind of, you know, for a while I've been wondering, because I also live on Map Hill, we're pretty much an all-white neighborhood. So I've like always wondered, what is it? Is it the socioeconomics, which would be an indication that, you know, Black people in our community are segregated by socioeconomics, which is socioeconomic racism? Or, I mean, I don't know what it is, because we're probably one of the most kind of, you know, conscious, welcoming communities in the city, and yet we're an all-white community. So
Right. What was
It's an
the name of the
interesting
book again?
observation.
Yeah.
You want to talk about racism.
yeah, So You Want to Talk About Race.
That's a good book.
Oh, that's the name of it?
Yes,
Yeah.
So You Want to Talk About Race.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nita?
Yeah. I'm Nita Burns, and I'm in Ventura, California. I was a member of Monte Vista for quite a while, and my
You
husband
still are.
I still am.
We're not letting you go.
My husband and I both were a member, and Bill passed in April of 2018, and I moved to California to be with my daughter. Now I go to First Christian Church in Santa Paula, the church affiliation I'm connected with now. But I grew up in Texas, West Texas, Lubbock area, and was there racism there? I like to tell the story that in my high school, we had 2,500 kids, grade, 2,500 kids, and we had one Hispanic family, all of those kids. And all of the Black kids went to Dunbar, which was in a different part of town. And the rest of the Hispanic kids went to Lubbock High School. And that was a mix of white and Hispanic. But so that was, you know, I went to Monterey, and that was white. And so that's, you know, and my dad was a postman, and he had a mail route in inward town. And he had this switchblade that he carried in his pocket that was about that long, about that thick, and he called it his inward sticker. So to say I had racist influence in my childhood was just, I mean, yes, I definitely did. So we had quite a few Hispanics in the town where I was, in the area where I was, though.
Thank you, Nita.
You're welcome.
Anne and Ken? Unmute. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Hi, Ken O'Rourke. I've been a lifelong resident of New Mexico. In younger days, I grew up in Los Alamos to the north of here. And Los Alamos at that time was very homogeneous, mostly white, some Hispanic families. And I didn't have a lot of exposure to racial tensions and racism because I don't know if I was shielded from that by my parents. So I wasn't largely aware of what was going on in the world. It was a very sheltered existence. Fortunately, I live in New Mexico, which is rich in the history of many cultures. And so that filtered into my life. I learned about the people who are in this part of the Southwest and in New Mexico. Not a lot of history because I've never been a big history buff until now. But I think I grew and expanded my understanding in my adult years. And like I say, I'm really happy to have grown up and lived in New Mexico. The reason I wanted to take this class is that I want a different perspective on history, a deeper knowledge of history than what I was taught in elementary and secondary school. That was very white-centric.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm happy to participate in a deeper study of real history, or a deeper look at history and what really happened. And that's why I'm taking this or participating in this class.
Great. Anne?
I grew up at Monte Vista, and I think that it had a very kind philosophy. We sang Jesus loves the little children, all the little children. My dad was a physician for a while in the public health department at the Cherokee Hospital in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And I think we were just taught tolerance at my home. And Kit and I formed our family through adoption, and our daughters are African American. So I think that made us more aware too, although I think love is supreme in a relationship. In a lot of ways, we were just so naive about the world and about how people would treat children. So sometimes when we were in ugly situations, I would speak up, not so much to influence the other people, but just so that my daughters would know that's not how I felt. And that what the other person was saying was not true to us. Yeah, it's interesting. One of my daughters is a nurse at night. And so she gets off late at night. And I didn't know this, but she carries it's a metal stake in her pocket, just because there's so many people who are not always kind and gentle late at night. So it's sort of ironic to hear Nita's dad's story. And then my daughter has to carry something sometimes to protect her. I'm talking too much, but I had an incident today that just happened. Jennifer, the nurse, had someone hit her windshield through with a rock last night while she was at work. So we went to help her out with her car, and a man walked by swearing at us all that we were on native land and we shouldn't be there. And he's right. And it tied into chapter 1. He said that he was Navajo and we weren't treating his people right. And then he told Jennifer to go back to Colombia. But she's African American, so that would not be her place of origin. And she was born in the United States. And I thought, well, that kind of ties into chapter 2. So anyway, I think this will be a pertinent discussion. And I know there's a lot of ugliness in American history and all history, but I think the more we understand, the better we can kind of hopefully learn to get along.
And then
Very good point.
One thing, when we encounter instances of racism and the way people talk and act, because we weren't, or at least for me, I'll speak for myself, because I wasn't immersed in it growing up, it's each instance is shocking to me. And the one that comes to mind right now, when I first started working at Honeywell and I was traveling for business a lot between Albuquerque and St. Louis, and I was on the plane, it was right after we had adopted the girls, and I think I had my wallet out, and the stewardess saw the pictures of the girls that I had in my wallet. And so I was beaming and proud and talking about our adoption. And she said, "Oh, what litter did they come from?"
Oh.
I didn't know.
And it hurt me. I didn't know what to say. I think probably good I didn't overreact and get thrown off the plane. But that really was shocking. It hurt. But I realize now there are a lot of people in the world that have that kind of thoughts, those kind of thoughts in their heart, and that's how they talk.
That's why this study is important. Thank you. Thank you. Brother Ryan just joined us. We're introducing ourselves and just talking about our first experience with racism quickly so we can get into our study. We're already 35 minutes into the hour.
Yeah. I grew up in according to the census, probably it would count as an integrated area. But in my classes, I didn't notice it, but I can look back and see that while my general ed classes were black and white, one of my best friends was, his family's from Pakistan, but as this classes started to stratify into like reading levels and that sort of thing, I noticed now looking back that I was always surrounded by white folks, and the black kids were always in the remedial level or the one that needed extra help, whether it's reading or math or that sort of thing. I don't know whether it's related or not. I'm from Baltimore, the home of redlining. This is the first city where that was used. My stepdad is a black man, and I think there's a lot of internalized racism for him. He was using education and economics to get away from something that he himself might not name it, but deemed to be less than where he wanted to be. And so I grew up with a man who is a black man, but was trying to separate himself from blackness after a fashion. So it's my whole life I've been sort of, not explicitly, but sort of underneath everything, seeing a distinction between whiteness and blackness, and having values ascribed onto it.
All right, thank you. Ted and Eleanor, if you want to quickly introduce yourself, and then Lisa, let's get started.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I actually was born in Wisconsin, and my folks grew up in Wisconsin. So it was pretty homogeneous. But I grew up with them being very, very open to the Native Americans, especially my dad when we moved down here when I was 3, worked for a Jewish fellow in Bernalillo. And he even tried to learn some of the Native American language because he was very interested in it. And we never had that much association with Black folks, but I was brought up to be completely open and fair with everybody and treat everybody equally. So it was a kind of a shock when I first hit real racism in our first church in Southeast Georgia. And we went, Ted's first church out of seminary was there in the late 60s. And we were pretty much caught unaware because we had no idea of the kind. I knew there was problems down there, but I had no idea of the prejudice that we were going to hit. And what really got me in trouble was talking about a Black friend I'd made there. You don't make Black friends. They're either your servants or acquaintance maybe, but that's about it. Mm-hmm. So that was an eye-opener for me. Mm-hmm. So, I think for Ted too. I think I'm speaking for both of us. But anyway, I ended up going with this Black friend, taking my kids back to see my grandmother in Wisconsin because she had cancer and I knew it was the only chance, and they were 2. And I wanted her to have a chance to see my twins. So that was really my first experience with real racism, was when I was an adult after I had kids. Because I grew up in New Mexico. We just didn't have that kind of thing that I was aware of. Mm. Probably more with the Hispanics than with any Blacks. When I went to Highland High, class of 60, I think there was only a couple, 3 Black kids in the whole school. And that's, of course, changed now, I understand. But
Ed?
So anyway, so I come at this with an adult education in racism.
I started way back. My father's maternal grandparents came to Kansas in 59 and 60 as abolitionists to help keep Kansas a free state. My mother's family were out of Virginia originally, and at some time or another had been slaveholders. So there was tensions from day one. Not overt, but they were there. And then coming to New Mexico when I was 9, the school system was half Hispanic, half Anglo. And believe me, I've had a lot of unlearning I've had to do in my life. And then traveling with family through the South in 59, I was confronted with the segregated restrooms, the whole routine. In college, we had the interesting experience. I worked with a Black graduate student, and his wife was in social studies, which we were in, and had classes together. So they had no car. The 4 of us would go to the drive-in theater together, and we really drew some stares, particularly in southern New Mexico. And then, of course, going to Georgia in the first church was a jarring experience.
All right, thank y'all. Lisa, you ready to get started? It is 3:45 now. We're gonna try to keep the study to about an hour, 15 minutes each time, maybe a little longer today since we did the introductions, but we want to honor your time and allow everyone the opportunity to participate. So remember to use the chat box and I'll keep an eye out for it. Thank y'all.
Okay, I'm Lisa, and my story is super quick. I was raised by a bone marrow deep racist for a father and a mom who would raise your eyebrows and he would hush. So that worked out. And then when I was in Sunday school, little white bread Sunday school, learning about Jesus and how he loved me and all this. And then I would even hear Christian people say ugly, ugly things about Jews. So I was going, are you kidding? Okay, I think this is a great time in history to have this conversation because of all that's going on in the media and whatnot. And I too thank you for sharing your experiences. I wanted to start each talk with a scripture. And if you want to bring, I'm not going to bring them all the time. You guys can bring one if you can. And in this one's very simple. It's Galatians 3:28. In Christ, there is no longer Jew or Greek. He doesn't care about our race. There is no slave or free. He doesn't care about our socioeconomic status. And there's no male or female. And he doesn't care about our gender. So that's one of my favorite scriptures. Okay, Howard Zinn, that we've been reading, some of you may have read a little bit about him. I'll just say he was a well-known professor of history at Spelman and Boston University. He took a lot of flack for writing this book. He's an author of like 30 something other book, or I don't know how many, a bunch of other books. He was a public speaker, and most of all, he was an activist. And one of his famous quotes says, "You can't be neutral on a moving train." And I had to think about that forever, and I'm not going to go into that. We don't have time. But if you want to look up a guy who discussed this really well, his name was Peter Kaufman, Kaufman. And he talked about Howard Zinn's "You can't be neutral on a moving train." Okay, now my first question I'm going to ask, and you don't all have to answer this, but just let Dawn know if you want to answer it. If you can remember back or think back before you started reading this book, what were your thoughts or what were you taught on Christopher Columbus? And if you can't remember what you were taught, what was your feeling when you were a kid about Christopher Columbus? So could some of you share that, please? Nita.
In 1492, that's what I knew about.
Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
Ocean blue, yes.
Anybody else?
That's what.
And that's what I was going to say. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Hey, he was a good guy. He discovered the United States of America.
There you go. Anybody else?
Yeah, it was taught that Columbus discovered America without any talk about who was already here.
Right.
Like it was brand new, nobody lived here, and he just discovered it.
Yes, I think that's the worst of all the assumptions that was made.
Until Thanksgiving. And
well,
then
until Thanksgiving.
And yeah, you know. And that just happened magically.
It did, and it's a lie.
I thought that he actually discovered the mainland of the United States, but that's not entirely true. It was the islands off the coast.
The West Indies.
Yeah.
The West Indies.
Right. So Thanksgiving doesn't really even apply to Columbus. We put him together.
Yes.
Yeah, that was more the Pilgrims, when the Pilgrims came.
And to me, like the verb discover is completely erroneous here because, and I think at some point we need to change the language that we use because ultimately that verb alone presents him as this heroic guy, But first of all, I mean, as the book points out, the Native Americans were the ones who came here first. If we were to talk about the discovery of the continent, it was discovered way before. It's more like he discovered it for the white culture, but ultimately it's more like invaded. That's what the verb should be.
Exactly. He invaded already populated place.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Okay, I just have a quick observation. I had to teach this. I taught 5th grade for 7 years. And there was one, I never used it, but there was this one page that I had that I could have passed out that said, talk about the characteristics of Columbus. Cite where you got this information. And all the adjectives were hero, discoverer, and all these positive things. So after I read this book, I went, oh, now I've got the true list. Mass murderer, racist, and all those things that Zen told us that he did. And he was a liar. He just did terrible things, and you guys read that. Okay, Eleanor has a question for you now.
You're supposed to give a question.
Oh, okay. Given the fact that we're studying history as it hopefully really was, I thought that it was interesting to discuss the idea of how Hollywood movies portray. What are they true? Are they not? Where do they differ? There's all kinds of movies made about our history, including Columbus. And there's much controversy that surrounds some of them. For example, the movie Mississippi Burning, the movie JFK. Many critics complain that when Americans see these films, they will believe falsely that the events and circumstances dramatized in these films accurately represent what happened during the periods in question. So, and for unstated reasons, this is wrong. So, Mississippi Burning has been criticized by liberals for leaving the impression that the FBI was honestly trying to help the civil rights movement.
Eleanor, would you restate the question?
I'm just talking, the question basically is, how do you guys see movies? You know, do you agree or disagree that when you watch a movie about our history, something that's like Mississippi Burning or JFK or 1492, I think that's the one that was about Columbus. I've only seen a couple of Columbus movies, actually. But the question is, how do you handle those? And are you aware that sometimes they're not giving you the whole story, or do we just kind of take it on faith?
I wasn't at the time, you know, like in the whatever 4th or 5th grade, you know, the Columbus was very white, and all of the people were very white, you know, and he just, I mean, you know, he didn't go into a black area, a black area. I mean, you know, and he didn't go into a Native American area. He went, you know, I mean, anyway, they had feathers in their head or whatever, but it was not a true depiction of the people who were here.
Yeah.
My movie experience has been more of the cowboys and Indians, where the Indians were savages and the cowboys were white heroes wearing white hats.
Mine too.
Yeah, some of these movies, actually, I think I saw JFK only one time, and I didn't really pay that much attention to it. It was a long movie, if I recall, like 3 hours long. Mississippi Burning also. Uh,
I think that a lot of the movies that I've seen don't go back as far as Columbus, but we get some movies not so much with the United States, but with British history, which concentrate on the royalty and the people in power. It doesn't pay very much attention to what the life was for the common person who had to steal a loaf of bread and paid for it with his life for stealing a loaf of bread. We don't see that very much. And I think with Columbus too, probably the same way, the attention is put on the bravery of the men who risked their lives to try to find a way to actually gain more profit for their countries, which we could debate too. But we aren't usually shown the kind of people they encountered and how they treated them. And you know, they weren't very nice.
right.
Thank you. Well, can you guys help me remember who was the lady that did the Grandma Moses that did the Underground Railroad?
Harriet Tubman.
Harriet. Have you guys seen the movie Harriet? That I think is one of the better history movies is Harriet, and it's more recent. And my husband is a super history buff, so every time we watch a movie, one of us after it's over runs in here and fact checks it. So I want to know if I'm being lied to. Anybody else have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I'd like to hear more feedback. Do you think documentaries do a better job always on telling us the truth?
Documentaries, what do you guys think?
I think everything that we see has a slant, and you have to go into
everybody has a point of view.
Yeah, everything has, yes. And you have to be aware and try to separate out what that point of view or that spin or that slant might be from the information you're being given. And it's pretty hard sometimes, I think.
It is.
I'm just thinking again, you know, we look at the writers of the books we read and the producers of the movies, how many of those are actually Native American producers or Native American writers or Black writers? It's like all of the books that are mainstream are written by white people, and even if those white people do not consider themselves to be racist, or even if the goal is ultimately to, you know, destroy racism, I mean, it's still the white perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the books I read this summer was written by a Native American professor. I don't remember his name. The title of the book is Columbus and Other Cannibals, which was absolutely incredible. And there was a term introduced, which is a Native American word, and I'm going to put it in chat. It's Wedico. And he talks about it as the disease of the mind. It's this kind of like, you know, internal drive to subjugate others and sort of this sense of supremacy. So that's what I want to say.
It's so true. It is so true. The white privilege is so rampant that people don't even realize they're participating in it, much less benefiting from it. Ted?
On part of this, though, we also have to recognize that Zen himself has a pronounced slant in his presentation of history.
Right.
For instance, and I had it up in the first lecture, he carefully discusses on the Arawak Indians and does not mention the Carib, which become the Caribbean, whereas they were a very dominant, much more aggressive group. And it would totally destroy Zen's picture of these harmless natives, these caring, giving people, if he included the Caribs. So there is a slant there also of which we need to be aware.
Yeah. Anne? You're muted.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The phrase of COVID days.
Yes.
You need to unmute yourself.
About the movies, it made me think of some movies we've seen and we've liked, but they were from the dominant culture's perspective. The Help, it talked about the women who worked in homes. And I did a book study with some teachers, and someone asked the question, well, who did you feel was the brave character? And someone said, well, they thought the writer was brave, but the writer didn't have to lose her livelihood or her place in the community like some of the women. And then we saw a movie, I think it's called The Green Book, and that was good also, but it was more from the driver's perspective, who was white, than the people who had to negotiate going to different places in the South. And I'm not saying those were bad movies, but like Katya, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I apologize if I didn't mention, a lot of movies are from the main culture's perspective.
Well, I have something to say.
Okay, Betsy?
It's in movies, they're made for usually one purpose, and that's to make money. So just think about that too, is I think they want to make history palatable and get it out to a bigger audience, which I didn't realize about the Green Book. So they did catch me, but we ought to understand that it's all in certain people's perspective, and it's going to be their slant, just like you're saying. And documentaries, I think, tend to be hopefully more true to the facts because they're supposed to be researched and promoted that way, if you know what I mean. And I think movies are just like money makers, number one, and then they want to get the message out too.
I agree.
I put in the chat box that it's interesting. I had noticed a while back that The Help is one of the most watched movies post George Floyd murder. People turn to a white hero movie in a day of anti-racism work rather than listening to the voices of the Black.
The same was said. I mean, this is not my insight, but I read about it and it really clicked with me. To Kill a Mockingbird is considered to be an all-time anti-racism book, but ultimately, if we look at the only Black character, he pretty much does not say anything. He's completely weak. He's completely at the mercy of the white hero. And I hadn't thought about it prior to reading this. And when I read that view, that kind of really changed the way I look at what is truly maybe, what truly intends to, undermine the system. Because ultimately, even though there are racist messages in the book, but it's ultimately, extolling a white hero who comes in and saves this Black man who's already accused, for no reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I haven't seen the movie The Hate You Give. I don't know if any of you seen it.
Oh.
It's a more recent movie. It's a pretty good depiction of racism from a variety of different perspectives, I think, and it really makes you think. It's also a book. You can get the book too, The Hate You Give.
The movie's, it's on my list to watch. I've been watching a lot of documentaries the last few months, and that one's on my list to watch soon.
I didn't say earlier that Bill and I were in northwestern Arkansas for 3 years when he was in the Air Force. And the big town next to us was Memphis. And we didn't realize what racism was until we went to Memphis. We were just driving along and we said we got lost on Beale Street and our car got spit on, but this was at the very height of the social justice time, the 60s, the civil rights movement. We were in Arkansas when Martin Luther King got killed in Memphis. So I mean, it was really a hotbed, and that gave me some of the other side's anger and what, that goes around, and I could feel their anger coming out. Let's say that.
Okay, we don't have much time, so I want to switch to chapter 2. And go ahead.
Does anybody have anything they want to lift out of chapter 1? I thought we could maybe, Ted has a really good lecture, so you can get some of the fill in there. But if anybody had anything they wanted to lift up about chapter 1 and then go to chapter 2.
I thought one of the interesting things that I didn't know was that the Spaniards and Portugal were already experienced in the slave trade when it came to the Americas. It was something I didn't really know at all. So I thought that was interesting.
This is another gap in Zen when he cites Samuel Ellis St. Morrison in terms of the history of Columbus. He's going to an older volume. His more recent book, which is still 30, 40 years old, clearly is much more sensitive to the racial background. This is where I picked up the fact that the Portuguese already were bringing in African slaves and had for 30 odd years before Columbus sailed. Yes. And that is The Admiral of the Ocean Sea, which is an excellent book.
Yeah.
Watch the chat box. I'm putting things in the chat box too, so.
Well, what I highlighted for myself is the idea of questioning progress, which benefits a privileged minority in the world. And I think it goes beyond race. It goes beyond just one ethnicity, because we always talk about progress and, we kind of, when we look back, we think of our civilization as progressing from one stage to another. But, I think this is where there's this link with what's happening today, not just in terms of racism, but, this privileged minority. And it's ultimately the privileged minority that, sponsors a lot of movie making and even documentary making. I think you can make a documentary in many different ways, and you can kind of pick and choose the facts that you use. So I think we're having a hard time questioning progress because we want to think of ourselves as, like progressing. And I mean, not to say that there isn't any progress, but I think we have a hard time like acknowledging how much pain our race and just our privilege brought to this world.
There's a great book that covers that. It's called White Fragility. So that's an interesting book if you want to. We're going to write down all the names of these books. And there it is. Okay. Dawn has it. White Fragility. And she's a white woman, and she does this with a black woman, and they go to big companies and talk about racism. And she says so many white people get angry because they say they're not racist, and they take it so personally. And she said they're the hardest people to teach are the white people. So it's really interesting. Okay, can I move to chapter 2 real quick?
Yes, here's another book.
And this guy, you have to read Ibram X. Kendi. He wrote Stamped from the Beginning, she's got that, and How to Be an Anti-Racist. Have mercy, those blew me out of the water.
There's a children's book he writes too, How to Raise an Anti-Racist Baby.
Oh, I don't know that one.
I have it.
Yeah, I'm writing that one down. We're going to make a bibliography.
Good. Oh, that's.
I'm giving these to our families with babies.
Excellent.
Very cool. Okay, I'm going to move on to chapter 2. And so that's more about the African American issues. And I'm just going to ask a couple of simple questions. Why did Virginia massacre Indians instead of trying to enslave them? Do you remember?
Run that question by again.
Why did the Virginia colony massacre Indians instead of trying to enslave them? It's on page 25.
Yeah, I think they said it was easier to do that.
Yeah, it's easier because the Indians were what?
Fighters.
They were bigger fighters. Very good. What else?
They
They
outnumbered.
outnumbered the whites enormously.
Say again.
Outnumbered the whites enormously.
They outnumbered all those white people who somehow still managed to oppress them. Anything else?
Better weapons?
Well, the whites had better weapons.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, the whites had better weapons.
That's what I meant.
The Indians, this was their home turf.
Exactly.
They knew how to survive and
Yeah.
have food. They had plenty of food. They weren't hungry. And they
Yes.
watched these poor white people starving to death and eating each other. And,
Yes.
and they were more resourceful, and they could just hide out. And they were very defiant, which I think is healthy, actually. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay, why were this is conversely to that question. Why were the Africans more vulnerable and easy to enslave? I saw some of the answers on page 26.
Well, they, first of all, they were uprooted. And so that was a traumatic experience that contributed to the sense of displacement. And also they came from a variety of different tribes. So a lot of the times they didn't even have a common language, which made it impossible for them to join forces.
To communicate, exactly. And the trauma, if you guys read that, the spaces they were put in, and
Yes.
it's nauseating. It was not, I felt nauseous when I read that.
Yes.
And their culture, by the time they got here, was all but obliterated. Because if they spoke, well, if they couldn't talk to each other, they got beaten up. And they couldn't. They were from different tribes. There's 1,000, 1,500 different languages on the continent of Africa, or maybe more. I don't remember. And they were so.
Different languages, it said.
Go ahead and say.
The black people all spoke different languages.
Right.
Have any, did you already say that? I
No,
missed.
that's okay. That's okay. And everything was foreign to them. It's like, the Indians knew where to hide and go get food. The black people were fish out of water. Okay, Eleanor, did you have a question you wanted to ask from chapter 2?
Okay, hang on, I've already pulled it up here. Yeah, Zinn argues that racism is not natural, but a product of human choice and historical circumstances. So given the forces that created racism, what choices need to be made to undo it? That gets into the book, How to Become an Anti-Racist. I immediately think of the song from South Pacific. You've got to be taught, to be carefully taught, to hate all the people your relatives hate before you are 6 or 7 or 8.
Yeah.
It's a taught thing.
Well, but it cannot be extricated from the greed of capitalism, and that's what Zen emphasizes. Like one of the elements he points out why American slavery was the most cruel form of slavery is because of the frenzy for limitless profit. And you know what I noticed, you know, after the revolts, the summer, the riots, how like Amazon and other big companies jumped on the moment right away and started talking about how they love all people, you know, and they support Black Lives Matter. But ultimately, that doesn't stop them from exploiting, you know, the what we consider socioeconomically like lower class, which mainly consists of people of color. So, I mean, I think we can still see this, you know, blossoming today, where it's so easy to talk about, oh, how we love all people and let's not be racist and let's just you know, be nice to everyone. But ultimately, it's not just about racism, it's about, you know, also our class system. It's about capitalism.
Absolutely.
Notwithstanding that is true, that greed and capital gain plays a big part, socioeconomics. I think inherently people tend to be afraid of what's really different from themselves. And I don't know how we can develop in our society a feeling that it's okay to learn about what's different, to accept what's different without being afraid.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what's got to happen.
It's that fear of the other
Fear of
and
the
risking
other.
self to get out and to meet the other. And that's part of what we're trying to teach at Monte Vista too.
Well, actually, I don't know if it comes from chapter 3 because I mistakenly read a little bit ahead, but what Zen points out is that when, like early on, when, you know, early on in the days of slavery, actually sexual attraction between the whites and the blacks was very strong, and there were a lot of, you know, not marriages, but there were a lot of unions and, you know, biracial children born. However, the system stepped in and made a point of, you know, creating penalty, very gruesome ones for blacks, you know, slightly less gruesome for whites because they didn't want to anger, you know, the whites. They ultimately wanted them on their side. That sort of, and this is where systemic, you know, the descriptor systemic comes in, how through centuries, you know, it's almost like that antipathy was bred and, you know, instilled in people.
Was, absolutely.
Yeah, Anne, you were going to say something? You're muted.
I think the idea of race is somewhat a societal term in that people are Homo sapiens, and you have perhaps more similarity from someone who doesn't look like you. You may have more antigens on your organs that are like someone who doesn't look like you, and you could donate or accept an organ from people who physically don't resemble you, because we're all people. And I think the idea of race has been kind of, it's made by people to say this group of people that live within this certain area and speak this certain language and look this certain way, they're a race. Now, at the same time, there are differences between groups of people. So I don't know how you would describe those. Certain medicines may work better on one population of people versus another, but they're all people. So it's kind of interesting.
Race is a construct used to separate. Ted?
Yeah, it's been said, I don't know, totally backed up by DNA, that about 10% of the white population in this country has Black ancestry, and about 90% of the Black population has white ancestry. And we will be hitting this in a number of the lectures because the amount of actual genetic mixing in this country is much larger than we realize. I have a coffee drinking acquaintance out of West Texas who had his DNA done, discovered he has Black ancestry, and lo and behold, the Black who drinks coffee with him, the two of them are getting along much better now.
Finding that commonality.
One of the things-
Dave?
I remember as a very young kid, I don't really remember how old I was, but I know I was very young. And there was a filling station right around the corner from where I lived, and there was black guys that worked over there at the filling station. And I happened to be over there for whatever reason, and one of them cut himself. I don't remember how he cut himself, but I was astounded because he bled red blood. It wasn't green or purple or orange or some other color. And I think that's when I first realized that, hey, we're all the same.
Amen. Good for you. Eleanor?
I'm going to say the DNA testing, I hope is going to help sort of level the playing field here as we all find out. I found out I actually have some Black ancestry on both sides, paternal and maternal. I'm about 0.3% Black.
Good.
So both of my parents have ancestors that have, I don't know how it worked out, but anyway, I've got some Black blood in me.
There you go.
So, but what I'm going back further than that, we all come out of Africa.
Right.
We all go back to some woman in Africa around 200,000 years ago. And
the cradle of civilization.
You know, this is it. We all have that background, and I'm hoping eventually that soaks in to people, that we are all related. We're all cousins. And of course, Northern Europeans all have some Neanderthal. I have about 3% Neanderthal, so that's almost 4%. So, you know, you find out how mixed we really are.
That's right. Which is a good thing to remind us that, like Dave said, we're all the same. We're all human.
Yeah,
We're all human.
The only reason we white folks are white is because we went north and didn't get enough sunshine.
Okay, I want to end us today. You guys have been great. I love it that you're all talkers. Thank you for all your sharing. The one thing that kicked me right in the gut of chapter 2 was the idea of savage versus superior. And he went into detail about how African societies and city-states grew faster than Europeans did. And we were so, you know, they wanted to get rid of Native Americans so badly. Well, that group of people inherently valued women more. And now we're trying to, you know, we've had years and years, we've had to, you know, cry and speak out for women's equality. And some of it was already here. And if we would have listened, if our ancestors would have listened, and maybe we mixed with these folks, it would have been better. And homelessness, they didn't have homelessness because they were communal livers. So as we read through this book, I want you to think about that question that Eleanor asked you that I've lost about what are the forces that began slavery? So make a little T-chart, you know, what made slavery happen in our country? And then on the other side, what are forces? What are specific things that we can do to undo racism? So thank you all for coming. You were wonderful.
And if you enjoyed the study today and you have people in mind that you think might be interested in participating, let them know about it. Share the link with them, but also let me know so we can add them to the list and know to expect them in the study. And broaden it, we'll get more people in. I'll double check with folks who didn't get on today and see if maybe somehow they didn't get the link. Any questions? We'll continue this format. If the group is larger next week, we'll need to all mute and be more intentional about requesting to interact, because it'll get real noisy and confusing if we don't.
Yes.
Katya asked what chapters we're reading for the next study. It's 2 chapters, right? Aren't we doing 3 and 4? Yes,
Yeah.
3 and 4. We're gonna do them 2 at a time most of the time. So we have 13 weeks set aside for this, just to be sure, because it's 25 chapters.
There is a feature on Zoom, but I forgot how to access it. You actually can raise your hand and that little red
Yes,
hand.
right.
I actually don't remember how to access that.
Either.
Some Zooms
and
work better than others. Some people can do it.
Participants,
Yeah,
on
get into
mine,
participants.
oh,
That's
Oh,
right.
yeah.
participants, there's a raise hand.
I don't see it.
Mine is on the bottom right-hand side.
Oh, there is a hand. I see Lisa's hands up.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, there.
Raise hand.
Yeah.
God bless you guys. I hope you have good weeks. And I value all your sharing. I had no idea you guys had adopted Black children, and that made me smile. That-
Is everybody up for a screenshot? You want to smile for the camera?
Sure.
Sure.
Oh,
Okay, thank you very much. Have a great week. God bless you, and see you next week.
Have a wonderful vacation.
Thank you.
Yes, yay.
I will.
so good to see all the people I don't usually see.
You too, Nina. You too.
Good to meet you, Katya. Good to meet
Thank
you.
you for coming, everyone. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.